As Jack and Amara walked down the street, the city around them seemed to blur. Jack's mind raced as he tried to put the pieces together. A boy had been with a stranger, and now Amara was terrified. But there was something more. Jack could see that her fear wasn't just for Jaden. It was for something deeper, something she hadn't yet said. They stopped at a street corner. Jack turned to Amara, who looked lost in thought. "Tell me everything, Amara," he signed gently. "I need to know. It might help us find Jaden." Amara hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly, and her eyes filled with doubt. She looked down at the sidewalk, as if the words might be too heavy to speak. Finally, she took a deep breath and began. "My name is Amara," she signed slowly. "Jaden is my little brother. We're not like other kids." She paused, as if searching for the right way to explain. "We don't have a mom or dad. They left us when we were little." Jack's heart tightened as he watched Amara's face. She was strong, but he could see the cracks beneath her calm exterior. "We live with our grandmother now," Amara continued. "She's old, and she works all day. Sometimes I take care of Jaden. He's only 8. I try to protect him, but sometimes it's hard." Her hands moved more quickly now, the words coming faster, more urgent. "People, they don't listen to me. They think I'm just a kid. They think I can't do anything." Jack nodded, understanding what she was saying. He had been in situations where people didn't take him seriously, where the only thing you had to rely on was your own strength and the help of the people who cared. "I know Jaden's in trouble," Amara said, her voice shaking. "He didn't come home last night. He's been sneaking out to see a man who promised him things. I don't know what kind of things, but Jaden thought the man was his friend. I didn't want him to go, but he wouldn't listen." Amara's hands dropped to her sides. He's gone before, but always came back. But not this time." She looked up at Jack, her eyes wide and filled with fear. "I know something's wrong. I feel it. The way he left. I don't know what to do anymore." Jack felt a rush of sadness for Amara. He knew what it was like to feel powerless, to be afraid for someone you loved. But one thing he had learned in his time in the military was that, no matter how impossible the situation seemed, you never gave up. "You've done more than enough, Amara," Jack signed, his hands firm and steady. "You've kept your brother safe as best you could. Now, it's my turn to help." Amara's face softened, and for the first time, Jack saw a small glimmer of hope in her eyes. She nodded slowly, as if his words had given her a sense of relief. She still had so much fear, but Jack knew that now. They were in this together. "Let's go find Jaden," Jack signed, his expression serious. "We won't stop until we bring him home." With those words, they continued walking, their pace quickening as they neared the place where they hoped to find answers. And, hopefully, Jaden. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. The sound of hushed voices coming from the next room made his heart race. Amara stood behind him, her body tense, her eyes locked on her brother. Jack knew they had to act fast. The longer they waited, the more dangerous this situation could become. He looked at Amara, giving her a silent nod. "Stay close," he signed firmly. "I'll create a distraction. When I do, you grab Jaden and get out. Can you do that?" Amara's hands shook slightly as she signed back. "I can," she said, her voice steady. She looked at her brother, her eyes full of determination. "I'll get him." Jack didn't doubt her for a second. He had seen how strong she was in the last few hours. But he also knew how risky this was. He needed to move fast and be smart about it. They stood at the edge of the doorway, watching the group of men in the next room. They were sitting in a circle, talking quietly, unaware of the two figures watching them from the shadows. Jaden was sitting in the middle, looking small and frightened. Jack's heart went out to him. He couldn't imagine what the boy had been through, sitting there alone in a room full of strangers. Jack took one more look at Amara. She gave him a quick nod, her eyes filled with trust. Without another word, he turned and carefully moved towards the other side of the room. He needed to get the men's attention without alarming them too much. A quick distraction, just enough to get their focus away from Jaden. As Jack moved, he kicked over a small metal can, sending it clattering to the floor. The sound was sharp in the silence of the building. The men immediately looked up, their eyes scanning the room. Jack held his breath, staying as still as he could. He watched as the men stood up, confused by the noise. This was the moment. Jack knew he didn't have much time. "Who's there?" One of the men called out, his voice gruff. Jack stepped forward, making his presence known. "Just passing through," he called out in a calm voice. "I heard voices and came to check it out. Didn't mean to interrupt." The men exchanged wary looks, but none of them moved toward him just yet. Jack didn't want to push his luck. He needed them to focus on him, so they wouldn't notice Amara slipping in the back. In a split second, Jack rushed forward, making himself seem more threatening. He raised his voice, trying to make himself appear as confident as possible. "You've got a problem," he said, "and I'm here to solve it." Amara, watching from the doorway, took her chance. She crept into the room, staying as quiet as she could. Her eyes never left Jaden. She couldn't afford to make a sound now. She moved towards him, her steps soft and quick, until she was just behind him. Jaden didn't see her at first. His eyes were fixed on the men, but when Amara gently tapped his shoulder, his head snapped around. His face lit up with shock and relief as he saw his sister standing there. Without thinking, he jumped to his feet. "Amara," he whispered, his voice full of disbelief. "You came for me." Amara grabbed his hand and quickly signed, "We need to go now." Jaden nodded, his eyes wide with fear. Together, they began to slip toward the door. Meanwhile, Jack was keeping the men distracted, moving slowly around the room, trying to buy as much time as possible. His heart raced as he listened for any sounds of trouble, but he couldn't turn around until he was sure Amara and Jaden were safely out. As the last man turned to face Jack, Jack took a deep breath and made his move. He wasn't going to let anything stop them now. They had to get out, together. The inside of the building was cold and musty. Jack's eyes adjusted to the darkness, and he squinted, trying to make out shapes in the dim light. The floor creaked under their feet, and Jack motioned for Amara to stay close. He wasn't sure what they would find, but he wasn't about to let anything happen to her. They moved through the building slowly, their footsteps muffled against the worn floors. Jack's mind raced, analyzing every shadow, every small detail. He had seen many abandoned buildings before during his time in the military, and they all had the same eerie silence. But something felt different about this place. It wasn't just abandoned. It felt like someone was hiding something. As they walked down a narrow hallway, Amara tugged at Jack's sleeve. She pointed ahead, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope. In the distance, Jack saw what she was pointing at. An old bulletin board, covered in papers and flyers. Most of it looked like clutter, but one piece of paper stuck out. It was a photo, a blurry image of a boy who looked like Jaden. Jack stepped closer, his heart pounding as he studied the picture. It wasn't the best quality, but it was clear enough to see that it was Jaden. The flyer underneath the photo was handwritten, and it mentioned a meeting later that evening. The address was the same as the building they were in. "This is it," Jack signed to Amara. "This is the clue we needed." Amara's face lit up with a mix of relief and fear. She looked at the paper, her hands shaking as she read the message. "It says they're meeting someone tonight," she signed. "A man, with money." Jack frowned. He could feel the tension growing in the air. This wasn't just a simple case of a lost boy. There was something more going on, something darker. But there was no time to waste. Jaden was in danger, and every second counted. He pulled the paper off the board, folding it carefully and slipping it into his jacket pocket. "We need to find the meeting place," Jack signed, his face serious. and we need to get to Jaden before they do. They turned down another hallway, and as they did, they heard voices. Low, muffled sounds, like people talking in the next room. Jack motioned for Amara to stay back and crept forward, his steps light. He reached a doorway and carefully peered inside. What he saw made his stomach drop. There, sitting in a circle on the floor, were a group of men. They were talking in low voices, but what caught Jack's attention was the boy sitting in the middle of them. It was Jaden. He was sitting quietly, his eyes wide with fear. As the men spoke to him, Jack's blood ran cold. He didn't know who these men were, but it was clear they weren't good people. They were talking about money, about plans for something big, and Jaden was right in the middle of it all. He was scared, but he wasn't making a sound. Amara stepped up behind Jack, her eyes filling with tears as she saw her brother. She signed quickly, her hands moving frantically. "That's Jaden. We have to save him." Jack nodded, his mind working quickly. They couldn't just rush in. He needed a plan. He took a deep breath, steadying himself before turning to Amara. "We're not leaving here without him," he signed firmly. "But we have to be smart, stay close, and do exactly what I say." Amara nodded, her face set with determination. Jack could see it now. She wasn't just a scared little girl anymore. She was ready to fight for her brother. And Jack would fight beside her. Together, they would get Jaden out. "You said." The days after Amara and Jaden found safety at the community center felt like a quiet new beginning. Amara knew that things wouldn't be easy, but they had taken the first step toward a better life. They were safe for now, but the memory of what had happened would stay with them. Still, Amara tried not to think too much about the past. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope. Amara and Jaden stayed at the community center for a few days while the staff there helped them. They provided food, warmth, and even new clothes. Amara was grateful, but more than anything, she was grateful to have her brother safe beside her. He was beginning to smile again, a small but important step. One evening, as they were sitting together in the center's small lounge area, a familiar face walked through the door. It was Jack. He looked tired, but his eyes held a calmness that made Amara feel a wave of relief. She stood up quickly, rushing over to him. "Jack, you're okay," she signed, her hands shaking with emotion. Jack smiled and nodded, holding his hand up in greeting. "I'm fine," he signed back. "I made sure the men were taken care of. It won't be a problem anymore." Amara let out a sigh of relief. She hadn't known what had happened after they escaped, but hearing Jack's words put her mind at ease. He had done what he promised. He had protected them. "I owe you so much," Amara said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. Jack shook his head, his face serious. "No, you did the hard part. You saved your brother. I was just there to help." Amara's eyes filled with tears. She knew Jack was right. Without his help, they might not have made it out. But it was her determination to find Jaden that had led them to safety. She had never stopped believing in her brother, even when things seemed impossible. After a moment, Jack spoke again, his tone a little lighter. "I've been thinking," he said. "There are a lot of kids out there who need help. A lot of people who feel invisible, like you did. I want to do more. I want to make sure no one feels like they don't have a voice." Amara listened carefully, unsure of what Jack meant. He was already doing so much. What more could he possibly do? "I'm going to start volunteering here," Jack continued. "And I want you to help me." Amara was surprised. "Me? But I don't know if I can help others." Jack smiled gently. "You already have. You've already shown what you're capable of. You've got strength, Amara. You've got more power in you than you know." Amara looked down at her hands, the same hands that had signed SOS for help. She had used them to call for help and save her brother. Maybe, just maybe, she could use them to help others too. "I'll help," she signed. "I want to make a difference. For Jaden. For all the kids who need someone to listen. Jack nodded, his eyes proud. That's the spirit. Over the following weeks, Amara became more involved at the community center. She helped organize events, assisted other kids in need, and taught sign language to anyone who wanted to learn. It wasn't always easy, but every time she saw the smile on someone's face, she knew she was doing the right thing. As for Jaden, he started attending school again, slowly but surely. He was shy, but the teachers and other students were kind, and it wasn't long before he found his place. Amara made sure to check in on him every day, making sure he felt safe and loved. Jack, too, kept his promise. He continued volunteering at the center, helping more and more people every day. And every time he saw Amara, he couldn't help but feel proud of the young girl who had faced so much and still had the strength to keep moving forward. Together, they had found a new beginning. It wasn't perfect, and there was still work to be done, but for the first time in a long time, they were hopeful. Amara knew that no matter what came next, she and Jaden would face it together. And maybe, just maybe, they could help others find hope, too. The ripple of their actions had already started, and Amara was ready to see how far it could go. The night was still, but the world around Amara and Jaden was full of questions. They had escaped the danger, but now they had to find their way to safety. The streets were quiet, and the cold air seemed to calm their racing hearts. It was hard to believe everything had happened so quickly. Just hours before, Amara had been in a panic, unsure of how she would save her brother. But now, they were free. Jack had made sure they were out of the building safely, but the last part of the escape had been a blur. She hadn't seen much after that, but she knew Jack was still out there somewhere. She hoped he was okay. Amara knew he wouldn't rest until he was sure they were both safe. Amara, Jaden whispered, his voice soft in the quiet night. He looked up at his sister, his eyes wide. Is it over? Are we really safe? Amara smiled gently at him, though she was tired too. The worry in his eyes tugged at her heart. Yes, Jaden, we're safe now. But we need to find a place to stay, somewhere where no one can find us. Jaden nodded, but Amara could see he was still scared. He hadn't said much since they escaped, but she knew how he felt. They had been through so much together. Amara's mind raced as she tried to think of where they could go, but she had no answers. Their grandmother's home was too far away. She needed time to figure out their next steps. Then she remembered something. There was a small community center nearby that helped people in trouble. She had seen it before, and the people there were kind. They could help her and Jaden until they figured out what to do next. It wasn't much, but it was something. Let's go there, Amara said softly, taking Jaden's hand. I know a place where we can be safe for a while. Jaden didn't argue. He trusted his sister, and right now, he just wanted to be with her. They walked in silence, their footsteps quiet in the dark. Amara kept her eyes on the street ahead, looking for the familiar sign that would lead them to the center. After a few blocks, they found it. The community center was small but warm, and as they entered, the warmth of the building wrapped around them like a blanket. There were a few people inside, talking softly or reading. When they saw Amara and Jaden, their faces softened with kindness. The woman at the front desk stood up and walked over to them. She was tall, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Are you okay? She asked. You both look like you've been through a lot. Amara nodded, her eyes filling with tears. We've been running. We need help. Please. The woman led them to a small room in the back where they could sit down and rest. She promised to help them find food and make sure they had what they needed to stay safe. Amara felt a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't have to worry about what was coming next. She and Jaden were safe. As they sat in the room, Jaden's head slowly tilted against Amara's shoulder, his small body relaxing for the first time in hours. She held him close, her heart full of love and protection. Thank you, Jaden whispered, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for saving me." Amara smiled, brushing her fingers through his hair. "I'll always save you, Jaden. Always." Amara didn't know what the future held for them, but she was sure of one thing. As long as they had each other, they would face it together. They had been through so much, but now they had a chance to start again. With new hope in their hearts, Amara and Jaden finally felt like they could breathe. They were safe, and that was enough for now. Amara and Jaden moved swiftly but quietly, their feet barely making a sound on the worn floorboards. Amara held her brother's hand tightly, leading him through the dimly lit building. Her heart was racing, but her focus was clear. They had to get out, and they had to do it now. Jack was still behind, distracting the men, but the longer they stayed, the more dangerous it would get. Jaden kept glancing nervously over his shoulder, his eyes filled with both fear and relief. He couldn't believe his sister was here, that she had come to rescue him. Amara squeezed his hand gently, offering him a small smile. "We're almost there," she signed, her movements quick but steady. "Just stay close." Jaden nodded, his small fingers wrapped tightly around hers. He was scared, but he trusted her. He always had. They'd reached the back door, and Amara paused for a moment, listening for any sounds. The building was eerily quiet except for the muffled voices of the men in the other room. She carefully turned the handle and pushed the door open just a crack. The cool night air rushed in, bringing a feeling of freedom with it. "We're so close," Amara whispered, her heart pounding. She motioned for Jaden to follow her, and they stepped outside, moving quickly into the shadows. But as they began to move toward the alley, Amara heard something, a loud shout from inside the building. Her heart skipped a beat. They had been spotted. She turned to Jaden, her face serious. "Run, Jaden. Run now." Without hesitation, Jaden took off, his small legs moving as fast as they could. Amara followed close behind, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The last thing she wanted was for them to be cornered again. She had to keep her brother safe, no matter what. As they turned a corner and dashed down a narrow side street, Amara dared a glance back. She could see shadows moving in the distance, the men coming after them. She pushed her legs to run faster, her breath coming in quick gasps. The sound of footsteps grew louder, but she didn't look back anymore. She had to focus on getting away. Up ahead, she saw Jack. He had managed to get outside, too. He was already moving toward them, his face set with determination. When he saw Amara and Jaden, he nodded, signaling for them to keep going. "Keep running. I'll handle this," Jack shouted. Amara's heart surged with gratitude, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. She and Jaden ran toward Jack, their footsteps steady, though they were both starting to tire. Behind them, the men were getting closer. Amara could hear them shouting, but she refused to look back. Jaden was still running beside her, his small hand clutched tightly in hers. She had to make sure they made it out, and she wasn't going to let anyone stop them. As they neared the street corner, Jack ran ahead and turned, blocking the path. He stood tall, his back to the alley, facing the men who were now almost upon them. Amara and Jaden paused for a moment, their breaths coming in short gasps. They were so close. Jack was giving them time to escape, but the men wouldn't stop. They were dangerous, and Jack knew it. "Go," Jack called over his shoulder. "Get to safety. I've got this." Amara didn't hesitate. She grabbed Jaden's hand and ran, her legs moving as fast as they could. The sounds of shouting and footsteps faded as they rounded another corner and entered a quieter part of the city. They were free. For now. Amara didn't stop until they were far enough away. When she finally slowed down, Jaden stopped beside her, breathing heavily, his face full of exhaustion and relief. She bent down to him, her eyes soft. "We made it," she signed, a smile finally breaking through. "We're safe." Jaden nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "You came for me," he whispered, his voice shaking. "You really came for me." Amara pulled him into a tight hug, holding him close. "I'll always come for you, Jaden. Always." Together, they found a safe place to rest. The night had been long, but it wasn't over. They were safe, for now. And as long as they had each other, Amara knew they would be okay. The sun was starting to set as Jack and Amara walked down the street, the evening light casting long shadows on the pavement. Jack's mind was focused on one thing: finding Jaden. He had no idea what they were up against, but he knew he couldn't waste any more time. Every moment was precious, and Amara's worry was growing with every step. "So, Amara," Jack signed, keeping his pace steady, "tell me about this man. What do you know about him?" Amara's hands moved quickly as she thought. "He's tall, and he always wears a hat. I've never seen his face clearly, but Jaden called him Mr. D. He always promises things to Jaden. New toys, food, things like that. He doesn't seem like a bad person, but I don't trust him." Jack nodded, taking in everything she said. He didn't need to know the details of Mr. D to understand that this was dangerous. He had learned to trust his instincts after years in the military, and everything in him was telling him that Amara was right to be scared. They walked past row after row of houses, each one looking more ordinary than the next. But Jack wasn't fooled. He had learned to read the signs, small details that told you whether something was out of place. And right now, something was very wrong. After a few more blocks, they reached an old brick building at the end of the street. The windows were dark, and the front door was slightly ajar. It didn't look like a place anyone should be. Amara stopped in her tracks, her breath coming faster as she pointed toward the door. "That's it," she signed urgently. "That's where Jaden was last. That's where I think he is." Jack studied the building for a moment. It looked abandoned, but he knew better than to trust appearances. People didn't always live where they seemed to. The door creaked as it swayed in the wind, and Jack could feel the tension in the air. This wasn't just a simple search anymore. They were about to walk straight into the unknown. "We'll do this carefully," Jack signed, his tone calm but firm. He looked around, scanning the area for any sign of danger. The street was quiet, but Jack knew that quiet didn't always mean safe. Amara nodded, her hands trembling. She was scared, but she wasn't backing down. Jack could see that she was determined to find her brother, no matter what. They moved toward the building, staying as quiet as possible. Jack's military training took over. He knew how to approach a potentially dangerous situation with caution. He checked the windows first, trying to peek inside. Everything seemed still, but Jack wasn't convinced. He could feel his heart racing as he prepared for whatever might be on the other side of that door. Jack turned to Amara. "Stay close. If I tell you to run, you run, understand?" Amara's eyes widened for a moment, then she nodded. She was terrified, but she trusted Jack, and that trust meant everything. Together, they approached the door. Jack reached for the handle, and with one last look at Amara, he pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The silence inside the building was deafening. Every step they took felt like it echoed in the empty space. The only sound was their footsteps, soft and careful as they moved deeper into the darkness. Jack's instincts told him they were close, closer than they had ever been to finding Jaden. But what they didn't know was that they weren't alone in the dark. Jack couldn't shake the look in Amara's eyes. It reminded him of the countless faces he'd seen during his time in the Marines, faces filled with fear, desperation, and hope all at once. He knew he couldn't just walk away. Standing there on the busy sidewalk, he sized up the situation. Amara looked fragile, but her determination was clear. She was holding back tears, but Jack could see her courage. She had done everything she could to get someone's attention. Now it was up to him. "Do you have anything to help us?" Jack signed, his movements a bit slow but clear. Amara nodded quickly and opened her small backpack. She pulled out a crumpled notebook and flipped to a page where she had scribbled a few words and a hand-drawn map. "Jaden," she signed, pointing to the name on the page. Then she tapped the map, indicating a place a few blocks away. It looked like a community center. "He was there," she signed, her movements sharp and deliberate. Jack nodded, his mind already working on a plan. "Okay," he signed back. "We'll start there." As they walked, Jack tried to make small talk. He wasn't used to chatting much anymore, but he wanted to keep Amara calm. He signed slowly, asking her about her family, school, and anything else that might distract her from her worry. Amara answered in short bursts, her hands moving fast. She explained that she and Jaden lived with their grandmother, who worked long hours. Jaden often wandered off to explore, but he always came back. This time, he didn't. When they reached the community center, the building was buzzing with activity. Children were running around, and parents chatted near the entrance. Amara clung to Jack's side, her eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of her brother. Jack approached the front desk and spoke to the receptionist. "Hi, I'm looking for a boy named Jaden," he said. "He might have been here earlier today." The receptionist frowned and shook her head. "I'm not sure," she said. "We get a lot of kids here. Do you have a picture?" Amara quickly pulled out her phone and showed a photo of Jaden. The receptionist's expression softened. "I think I saw him earlier," she said. "He was outside talking to someone. A man. I thought he was with him." Jack's stomach tightened. "What kind of man?" he asked. "I didn't get a good look," the receptionist said. "But it seemed off. I thought about saying something, but they walked away pretty quickly." Amara's face crumpled, and she turned to Jack, signing frantically. "He's endangered," she said. "We have to find him." Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We will," he said firmly. He turned back to the receptionist. "Which direction did they go?" She pointed down the street. Without hesitation, Jack nodded to Amara, and they started walking. He didn't know where this path would lead, but one thing was certain: he wouldn't stop until Jaden was safe. Amara stood at the corner of a busy street, her small frame nearly lost in the chaos of cars, buses, and people rushing past her. She was only 12, but her eyes held a look far older than her years. She clutched her backpack tightly, her hands moving in frantic motions, as if she was trying to speak without words. No one stopped to notice. Jack sat across the street at a small cafe, sipping his morning coffee. The retired Marine enjoyed these quiet moments in the city. The world seemed to move too fast for him now, but he appreciated the simplicity of sitting, observing, and blending into the background. He had seen a lot in his life, things that still haunted him at times, but today felt calm, like the kind of day he could relax in. As he scanned the street, his eyes landed on Amara. At first, she just seemed like another kid waiting for the light to change. But then he noticed her hands. They weren't random gestures. They were deliberate, urgent. His military training stirred a memory deep inside him. It was the universal SOS signal. 3 quick movements, 3 slow ones, then 3 quick again. Jack frowned, leaning forward. "That's not something you see every day," he muttered to himself. Amara's hands kept moving, but her face showed frustration. She glanced around, but no one was paying attention. Jack could tell she was scared, though she tried to hide it. He had seen that look before, in places far from here. It was the look of someone in trouble. He stood up, leaving his coffee behind, and crossed the street. Amara noticed him approaching and it froze for a moment. Her eyes met his, wary but hopeful. Jack raised his hands, palms open, trying to show he meant no harm. Slowly, he pointed to her hands and signed, "Are you okay?" Her eyes widened in surprise. She didn't expect anyone to understand her, let alone use sign language. She hesitated, then shook her head firmly. She began signing back, her movements fast and filled with desperation. Jack could only catch part of what she was saying. Something about her brother, missing, and danger. "Slow down," Jack said gently, signing as best as he could. His fingers were rusty, but he remembered enough to communicate. Amara took a deep breath and repeated herself. Her brother, Jaden, had disappeared. She thought he might have been taken, but no one would listen to her. She had tried asking for help all morning, but people either ignored her or didn't understand her. Jack's heart ached as he listened. He knew what it felt like to be invisible, to cry for help and feel unheard. He nodded firmly. "I'll help you," he signed, his voice calm but steady. "We'll find your brother." Amara's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. She nodded back. For the first time all day, she didn't feel alone. And just like that, their unexpected partnership began.